Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Mastering Midlife, How to Thrive When the World Asks the Most of You. My name is Mark Silverman. I am your host today. Today, I'm joined by the amazing Dolin, who I've known for several years, and I can't wait to share her with you. She's a former school teacher, 25 years teaching kindergarten through college, so she's seen it all. In 1998, from her kitchen table, she founded Education Connections by doing some tutoring, which has now grown into helping thousands of people. She has over 200 employees. So she's a businesswoman of consequence now. She's written a bunch of books. She wrote a book called Homework Made Simple, which I think would be really useful for any of you who are a parent. And also the newest book is Getting Past Procrastination, How to Get Kids Organized and Focused without, and not, tell me the name of your book.
Sure. It's Getting Past Procrastination, How to Get Your Kids Organized, Focused, and Motivated Without Being the Bad Guy.
Thank you so much. I do this podcast without reading glasses, and every once in a while I write it in gigantic big letters so that I think I can read it without my glasses. And that's the hazards of being in midlife, right? I'm useless without reading glasses. And thank you for being on the show. Thank you,
Mark.
So the reason I wanted to share, in talking with you and reading your book and seeing how you interact with people, we were talking before the show. I'm torn because a lot of the people who listen to the podcast have kids who are in school and are having trouble getting them to do their work and do their homework. And A.D.D, whether it's real or not, is running rampant. And then I also have a whole bunch of my constituency who are in the same boat. We're trying to get our kids to do our homework when we can't get to our stuff. And midlife is a time when, the world is crushing in on us from every direction. So we talked about, maybe we'll start with the adults and see where we go.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting, Mark, because oftentimes when kids have these difficulties, the parents will say, I was just like that as a kid. Or I had these same struggles, or I know where she gets it from. And so it's not uncommon for kids that have a little bit of difficulty with staying focused or managing their time, thinking ahead, understanding consequences, to have a parent that also has those issues or did have those issues when they were younger too.
My ex-wife and I would sit at the kitchen table with my son and we'd be like, look, you don't understand. We don't want to go through, this is as much agony for us as it is for you. Because we both struggle with this.
Yes, a lot of people can relate to that. And you just want to tell your kids, I know the way. I dealt with this, so I know how to make this better for you. The problem is our kids don't want to hear it from us. They're willing to hear it from somebody else, but definitely not mom or dad. And that's often where we see power struggles in families, where it's really important to the parent, for example, to get good grades, get your work in on time, but to the kid, not so much. So whenever there's a disconnect between motivation levels, that's often where power struggles take place.
Wow, that's interesting. So what do people mostly come to you for?
I have a tutoring business now, and we work with kids of all different grade levels. The majority of the students we work with are in middle and high school. And I'd say that they really, Mark, fall into three different categories. First, we have the kids that are really smart. All of our kids are really smart, but they're kind of scattered. They're the smart but scattered crowd. They tend not to be so organized. They don't really plan their time well. They're not always sure how to study. Yet they're generally doing okay in school, but it's, it feels harder than it should. We also see kids that have particular subject struggles, and we see this a lot in cumulative subjects like math, where one skill builds upon another. A lot of people with focus issues will say, I had difficulty as a kid in math or writing, which requires a lot of working memory. You're having to juggle a lot of thoughts in your head to get your ideas down on paper, or to work through all those steps in a problem. And then lastly, and this is the biggest growing group of kids we see, the kids that are stressed out over studying. And these are kids that often have perfectionist tendencies. They want to do a really good job, and sometimes they will overstudy. So instead of studying for, say, 45 minutes for a science quiz, they will go over and over it again for a number of hours when it's really not necessary. And often they're not studying efficiently. They don't really know the best ways to study, and they're putting in too much time. And so we work with them to be a lot more efficient, which often dials back that anxiety.
Ooh, so what do you think the cause of the anxiety is in the first place that people would go and actually overstudy?
Well, a lot of times, in this area in Northern Virginia, for example, anxiety is rampant. Everybody you talk to says, not everybody, but most people, my child is often anxious. And it's common. And, it's easy to think, oh, it's the parents. The parents are putting all this pressure on the kids. But I actually don't think that's always true. I think actually the kids put a lot of pressure on themselves. They look around and they see, gosh, all my friends have a 4.0. I should have a 4.0. All my friends are applying to these top tier colleges. I should be applying to schools like this. And so just because we live in a fairly affluent and competitive area, it just kind of happens. And it isn't always the parents that are saying, you need to do better and better.
Mm. So it's so funny because when you talk about I say it's so funny because that's a phrase we use, but it's actually for me kind of heartfelt tragic that you're talking about the kids, and every adult I talk to says the same thing. They're competitive internally. They're falling behind. They look left. They look right. They're not keeping up with everybody. They're a little bit anxious, right? So I think the parents are dealing with a lot of the same thing. And I think
yes.
Go ahead.
That can definitely be the case. And, even as parents, when we're feeling a little bit anxious, that sometimes that can be absorbed by our kids too, even though we don't do it knowingly. I always remembered, my kids are older now, they're 21 and 17, but I remember my oldest one. And, your firstborn kid, you don't know what you're doing. And even though I'm in this profession, and I've helped so many kids over the years, it's always different with your own child. And I realized this pattern I had. I realized that I was just myself more anxious when it came time for exams for him. So at midterm time and finals time, I'm like, why am I feeling so anxious? And then it dawned on me, I'm anxious because it's finals time for him. And I don't think he's studying hard enough. And even though I didn't put that pressure on him, I'm sure it emanated in some way. But I felt stressed because of the environment that we were in exam time. And so I think as parents, even if we don't say the words, like you need to get straight A's, we may somehow kind of put that down on our kids in some way.
So, I think that's just kind of, we see the path ahead and we want that path to be as wide as possible for them. So we want them to have as much opportunity so if their grades are bad or not as good, they'll have less opportunity. And I think for me, that's just what I want. I want my kid to be able to have as much choice as possible.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. We want our kids to have lots of choices. We don't want them to come time for college and realize that they're only going to be able to get into these lower tier schools. We want them to be able to cast a wide net. And in this area, everybody wants to go to generally the same schools, to, for example, UVA and Virginia Tech and William and Mary. And that can put a lot of stress on kids, just knowing that their opportunities can be limited just by the sheer number of kids applying to those schools.
Yeah, it's funny. I had two kids who couldn't be, they're really close, but they couldn't be more different. My older son applied to one school and one school only, Virginia Tech. And I'm like, don't you want to have other options? He goes, Dad, really? And he got into Virginia Tech and he just graduated and he got a job and he's doing. My other son is, just came back from Israel. He took a gap year because school just wasn't his thing. No matter how many tutors, and he even said it. So here's the interesting thing. We got a coach, we got a tutor and an A.D.D coach. And at the end of senior year, the last semester he started clicking on, right? And he says, Dad, I just never wanted to do the work. It wasn't the skills. It wasn't anything. I just never wanted to do it. Now I care. And now he's doing, he takes some classes at Nova. He's doing great. But it's really interesting there. So I want to shift gears. So we said we wanted to talk about the adults. Let's just talk about focus and getting things done. Like, I'm sure at cocktail parties, when people know what you do, they actually talk to you about, like, I'm just as scattered as my kid.
Sometimes they do. And sometimes they'll share, oh, as I mentioned, I have those same issues. I can see where my kid gets it. And so it's not uncommon. But what I found for kids is generally true with their parents, is that if they can take Sundays and use that as a launching point into the week, it's hugely valuable. For example, for kids, if they can look ahead to the week and say, okay, what tests do I have coming up? What homework assignments are due? Are there any extracurriculars that could get in my way of getting all my work done? For example, on Tuesday, because I have a big test on Wednesday, they might have a soccer game, whatever it is. But looking ahead can be hugely powerful for kids. But kids don't always think like that. So they kind of arrive on Monday, just showing up without really having that week ahead. And I often share with kids, a day is too short. If you're just planning your life day by day, it's too short-sighted. A month is too long. So the expectation that I'm going to plan my month in advance is unrealistic for students. But a week is just right. And I believe the same works for adults. It may be unrealistic for us when we're so scattered in so many ways and so distracted by everything going on in our lives that a month is too much to expect. But that week time, I found for myself and for kids and for their parents, that seems to be that perfect time frame of being able to get stuff done.
I think you just revealed a dirty little secret, because for me, because I wrote a book on my own bout with ADD, the only tens, I use a week. I use the day and I use the week. And I always say either Sunday night or Monday morning, look at your week, plan your week, and then decide what you're going to do today. And the difference between the people who are anxious and the people who are not anxious, or the people who actually have a successful bout with their to-do list, are the people who actually take the time to plan. So I think there would be a lot of less diagnosis of ADD, scattered, all this stuff, if people actually took the time and forced themselves, I'm going to take 30 minutes and plan my week. So that's a little nugget that people will probably glaze over and roll their eyes going, yeah, I know, planning, and then don't do it.
Yes, it's true, but it can be so incredibly powerful. I struggle with those things too, Mark. And if I found for myself, if I don't have systems in place and I just go through life doing whatever, responding to emails, putting out fires in my business, dealing with employees without a plan, I can easily get derailed. And that's the same with students. So we share with them, take that Sunday, plan your week, and then if you have time, even better, and this is easier for adults than it is for kids, if you can set your intentions for the day in the morning, and I heard this saying recently, win the first hour of the day and win the day. And I think that's true. And it doesn't have to be an hour. I think an hour is probably a little bit long. But for a lot of people, just sitting down, looking at your day and coming up with what are your intentions. And it may not be, I need to get X, Y, and Z done, but it could be, I want to tell Mary how much I love working with her, or share with an employee how great they did on a project. Those are other kinds of intentions. And any of those gratitude intentions can also make a huge difference.
Wow, that's a beautiful little nugget. So you just mentioned systems. And I think James Clear in Atomic Habits talks about how we fail to the level of our systems. So what systems do you have in place, or do you suggest people put in place to be able to win a little more easily and not fight that willpower thing?
Well, there's lots of systems. We use one for kids that works just as well for adults. We call it the launching pad. And a launching pad is really like a bin or a basket. It could be an old dish pan. It really doesn't matter, some container. And it goes by the door from which the child leaves in the morning. So, if they come in and out through the mudroom, maybe it's by that door. And the night before, they get all their stuff together. So they get their binder in the their backpack goes in the launching pad. Maybe they play a musical instrument or they need their things for soccer after school, whatever it is. All that stuff goes in the launching pad. So they launch into the day in an organized fashion. And the same works for adults. What is it that I can do tonight to plan for tomorrow that make my mornings much easier? Because mornings, if you start out the day, at least for me, stressed and anxious, it just kind of sets the wrong tone for the day. So anything you can do at night can be helpful. Maybe it's that you'll make your lunch, or you're going to lay out your clothes for the next day, or you're going to check your schedule. All of those things are kind of like a launching pad. You're thinking ahead to what do I need to make my morning less stressful. So that's a system.
I love that. I don't do it anymore because I work from home, but I used to put my gym bag, my work stuff, everything by the door every night before I went to sleep. Wake up, grab the coffee, everything's there to go out the door. Less decisions.
That's right. And because it's a routine, and anytime we can have a routine, it just frees up space in our brain. So then we can really think about, like, what are my intentions for the day, for example, instead of running around, making our lunch, figuring out what we're going to wear to work that day, whatever it might be. So routines really set your brain free. Routines free up space to make better decisions.
Isn't that habits and routines are actually freeing?
I think so. Even the simple one, like when you get home from work, where do you put your keys? If you always have the same place that you put your keys, you're freeing up space. You don't have to remember, where did I put my keys, and searching all around for your keys. And I find that for people that are not naturally organized, because a lot of the kids we work with are not naturally organized and their parents struggle with those things too. Just having those little systems can make a huge difference. And if we can teach our kids these little systems when they're growing up, it makes adult life a lot easier. And they may not always use it at the time, but I've had kids. I ran into a kid, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and he said, Miss Dolin, you know that whiteboard system? I'm like, yeah, I love the whiteboard system. He's like, it's golden. He goes to Cornell. He said, I've used it every year of college and it saved me. And it's the system for figuring out what you have to do for the week, and then having a little prioritized to-do list for your homework assignments. And so those are systems.
So can you be more specific about that? Because if I'm in the car, because I'm like, tell me it now.
Well, it could work for adults too. I think it can, but I'll tell you how we use it for kids. I recommend that every kid have a whiteboard. Free up all that space in your mind that you can have a place to see all your things. And a lot of kids will also use Google Calendar to keep a list of their assignments. But there's just something about seeing it in a big space in your room or the area in which you study. So it's basically a grid with Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday are grouped together. And then the kids figure out, all right, what are the big things that I have to get accomplished this week? All right, I have a biology test on Thursday. So they'll write biology test on Thursday, and then they'll break out what they have to do to study for that biology test into little components. Maybe on Tuesday and Wednesday, they'll write review 15 flashcards and complete study guide. And so those little pieces of the story go also on that whiteboard. And before you know it, you kind of have like this itemized to-do list of what you need to do. So it's freeing space from your mind of, oh, I got to study for that biology test. No, it's already there. It's already something you know how to do. And I think, and this has actually been proven by research, and I'm not so much sure about using it with whiteboards, but there is something to taking notes by hand instead of typing it on a laptop. There was a study done with college students. How do they retain more in a lecture? Is it typing or is it actually handwriting? And it's marginal, but it is actually that active handwriting because it's visual motor, writing it out, integration. And when you can combine that visual to motor to writing it out, it's more powerful to learning. And I believe that's why a whiteboard system is incredibly powerful.
I feel so validated. I have, I'm going to put a plug in for Righty Board. It's a gigantic board that you just, like I have an entire wall in my office covered in a whiteboard, because if I don't see it, it's not going to get done. So everything has to be on my whiteboard, and then I can relax once it gets onto my whiteboard. So I love this system. I think it's really cool. The other thing I like. Go ahead.
Oh, Mark, what is it called? Righty board?
Righty board. I'll send you the link, and I'll put the link in the show.
Awesome.
But and they have calendar ones, they have blank ones, but I bought it's 8 foot by 5 foot, and you just unroll it and you put it along the wall. My wall is only 5 by 5. So I have a big 5 by 5 whiteboard. I use that with my clients all the time who are in person, but I use it for myself. Everything I need to know. And sometimes just before I go to bed, I'll run out of my bedroom, run into my office, and write something I thought of on my wall. It's so much easier than finding a piece of paper and all that stuff. So I feel validated. The other thing is really cool is I agree with you with the kinetic writing of notes, and then something like Evernote, where you can just take a picture of your notes. Now you can have it in electronic format, and you took it so it can be on your laptop and it can be in a notebook. I think that's a brilliant hack.
Great. Excellent.
So I want you to go further. I want this to be like a self-help conversation on the podcast. What other systems do you use for yourself that actually work?
Well, I actually don't use a whiteboard. I have a system called the Life Planner, and I like it because it's pretty much like a whiteboard, but it's in a little journal. And you can also categorize the tasks that you have to do by, is it urgent and important? The 4 quadrants. Is it urgent but not important? And when I first started this system, I realized I was putting a lot of pressure on myself by trying to do everything, even the things that were like not really that important. For example, I had to mail something back to Amazon. Is that really very important? Probably not, but I would prioritize that over coming up with an editorial calendar, for example. Well, the editorial calendar is way more important than returning something to Amazon. So that little quadrant helped me to better prioritize what I needed to get done in that day. In reality, for adults, a whiteboard system, unless you work from home or you have a dedicated space, might be difficult, but it could just be a planner that you have. Other people find a lot of value just using Google Calendar and putting their tasks in that way too. Personally, I like Todoist as well. So if you want to keep a to-do list on your phone, that's a great app for kids and for adults.
Todoist.
Mm-hmm. Todoist.
Okay. I'm going to put a link in there because I've used Todoist, and it actually works with only 10s, which is really kind of cool for myself.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, I forgot the question.
Oh, Mark, I do that all the time.
Thank God for editing, right? Okay. Oh, actually, I know what the point is I want to make. So from what I gather from everything that you have to say is that little ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Anything you can do to set yourself up for success pays dividends.
Absolutely. And it just really dials down your stress level. Instead of thinking about all the things you have to do and such little time that you have, when it's all laid out and it's prioritized, it just makes life a little bit easier. And I think that there's just tremendous value in what we talked about, using Sundays to look ahead at the week and then using time in the morning to set your intentions. Those, to me, have made the biggest impact in students and adults that I know.
What surprised you? So of all the, like, you're just a wealth of knowledge, and you've done more education than most human beings, both for yourself and then of other people. What surprised you that helps other people, that helps people get them stuff done?
Well, I think the biggest thing that surprised me in working with kids over the years is the breakdown in communication with their parents. And, just because parents are successful and they have lots of degrees, and we think that something as basic as communication would be easy for everyone, it is the hardest thing in raising kids. And because parents generally have been successful in their own careers, they want the same for their kids. And they often revert to telling kids what to do because, in essence, we know a lot about these things. We've been through this stage of life. So we know, for the most part, what works and doesn't work. But kids don't want to hear it from their parents. So I've found that a parent's natural inclination is to tell their kids what to do. You need to study for that science test. If you just put more time into that, you'd be doing better. Come on, focus. If you just put that video game down 20 minutes ago, you would have been done with all this homework. What do you mean you're not done with your homework? You've been up in your room for 3 hours.
Oh God, I'm guilty of all this.
We all are. It's perfectly normal. But I think what I've realized over the years is that hardly ever works. And because we're educated people, you would have thought that we would have figured out this doesn't really work, but often we don't. And we keep doing these things over and over again. I found this concept of powerful questions is actually the best thing that parents can do. It doesn't just work with kids, it works with our spouses and our coworkers, our bosses. But it has to do with, instead of saying, did you study for that science test? It might be, oh, what's the first thing you might do to get started? Instead of asking, do you have homework? It might be, what are your priorities for this evening? So there's this thing called executive functioning skills. And executive functioning skills are your abilities to do lots of things like stay organized and plan ahead, to prioritize, to see consequences later on. But one thing a lot of kids and adults have difficulty with is thinking about, going back to that, do you have homework question? What are my priorities for this time period? And although kids won't always be super verbal if you ask that question. For example, if you say to your daughter, so Susie, what are your priorities tonight? It's unlikely she's going to say, well, let's see, Dad, I got to study for that biology test. I need to finish that essay. Oh, and I really have to get started on that science lab. That's probably not going to happen. But it does help kids to start thinking about, okay, actually, what are my priorities? I do need to study those 15 words for biology. And so even if they may not be verbose with you, they do start the inner workings of their brain going into thinking like that. And even for working with adults, if we can ask these powerful questions instead of telling people what to do, I found that the outcome is far better because people are more willing to buy into what you're asking.
Do you have examples of these questions in your books?
I do, yes. In fact, I have a page on my website with that outlines all kinds of questions. And I just love questions. I just even like asking permission too. Hey, is it okay if we talk about, your weekend? Do I have permission to talk to you about your weekend? Like even little things like that, instead of you better be home by 12, just asking questions is a far better approach. And it's little things like that you would think that parents would kind of be good at after all these years. We tend to, as adults, even revert back to telling our kids what to do.
I'm a coach. That's what I do. I ask questions. People say, how do you get results? I ask questions. I pull things out. And I don't do that with my kids, right? I tell my kids what to do all the time. I notice it. So you're absolutely right. And I think you just gave me the money shot. Every podcast has that little piece of gold. That part of your website, I'm going to send people there with the show note in the link in the show notes to your website to get those questions, because that perked me up quite a bit.
Great.
So someone's driving in the car. They're just about to work. They're just about done with this podcast. What nugget of real wisdom do you want to share with parents, both about themselves and about their kids, when it comes to this whole dynamic?
Sure. Well, when it comes to kids, there is no one size fits all approach to all kids. You can read lots of books and listen to podcasts and watch segments on TV about this is what you should do. But you are an expert in your child and you know your child best. So if your child happens to be having difficulty in school, the first thing is to understand, why is that the case? It's often easy to think that it's a motivational issue, but in my experience, I can probably count on one hand the kids that don't really care. They all care, It's just that this may not be high on their priority list, or it could just be hard for them. And there's a reason kids resist. I often, when I go to schools and I do workshops for parents, and one of the activities I have them do is to get with a partner. And I have them sit across from each other and they have to both put their hands up, palm to palm. And I'll say, okay, the people on the left, I want you to push on your partner's hands. And as they push on their partner's hands, you see what happens. You see that the partner pushes back on the person who's pushing in the first place. And that's exactly how a relationship is with a kid. The more you push as a parent, the more your child is going to push back. So figuring out, why is it that my child is having struggle in this area, and figuring out, is the pushing that I'm doing creating more of a problem? And do I need to back off a little bit, as really key in relationships? And it's probably the same for adults too. Sometimes the more we push with our spouses, the more we push back. And it's our job to figure out, okay, is this working or not? Because maybe it's not.
I totally agree. I was just thinking as you were talking, like, oh God, I wish I knew Ann 20 years ago when my kids were little. And then I just realized I do the same thing now. My son got on a plane to go to California and I'm pushing. Did you do this? Did you check in? Did you do this? Did you do that? It's like, and it works now with my adult children. It'll work with my partner. It'll work with people I work with. These are strategies just for a relationship.
I think so too. And they take practice. So it's easy to hear this and say, I'm going to do this. But it's harder to actually keep doing it. And that's the key. Even though it's our natural inclination to tell our kids what to do, the more we can practice asking questions, even if it's just a couple questions a day, the easier it will get.
Cool. So where can people find more about you?
Sure, Mark. My website is ectutoring.com, and E is for educational and C is connections. That's the name of my company. And I have a resources page and a blog page with all kinds of information for parents.
I will put that in the show notes. And I really, really suggest that people get your book, Getting Past Procrastination, How to Get Kids or Yourself Organized and Focused Without Being the Bad Guy. I love that. I think it's a real, you and I compared our books together and I was like, I really recommend your book to other people for because we all deal with it. So I think your expertise is timely and really good for a stressed out population.
Thank you, Mark.
So thank you for being on the show. Again, I will put everything in the show notes so you can get in touch with Ann. To everybody else, thank you for your most precious commodity, which is your time and your attention. I love you for spending time with us. Have a great rest of the day.